Stan Heuston for Church of Democratic Enlightenment. Democracy and religion. Breakdown and missing part. I think theory commonly draws strength from separate lines of thought coming together. Here they are that we can reason that we mustn't have a properly working democracy from the failure in practice of the democracies, and reason to it also just from our knowledge of what democracy is supposed to look like. First, reasoning from dysfunction, as well as its overt indications, we know the public has lost trust in the institutions of our society, and our sense tells us that democracy can't survive that for long. The reason for this loss of trust can, in a simple sense, be only one thing. The institutions are not accountable to the people. So it is clear from this that something is missing, and that is the mechanism for the people holding the institutions to account. Basically then, what is missing is a political organisation of the people that would enable them to say what they expect the institutions to do and to punish and reconstruct the institutions if they don't do it. Second, we know what democracy looks like, or what it is supposed to look like. We know from Montesquieu and the preamble to the US Constitution that democratic society is characterised by tranquility, as we know from the French Revolutionary motto that it is characterised by equality and fraternity as well as liberty. We know these ideas go to the Enlightenment social contract, the basis of civil society, where rules and laws, including morals, agreed to by all, replace the lawless individual and private pursuit of self-interest by force, the law of the jungle or state of nature. We know the latter is a chaotic competitive state, the opposite of the classic civil society. We can see that the calm, settled state of the democracy of the social contract is also a necessary condition of popular rule, the condition whereby the democracy can only be ruled and progress by popular agreement. The people cannot think on their feet, deal with changes to the laws, rules, morals by which they rule society on a day-to-day basis. For the people to reach and express agreement with a change to law, regulation or morality may take months or years. So democratic rule requires an orderly consideration of any changes to existing law, rules and morals based on a clear understanding of the present position, a clear exposition of the benefits of change, plenty of time for the people to discuss changes, a fair means of deciding where the change should occur, clear understanding of exactly what change is finally proposed, and a direct and uncompromised implementation of the popularly agreed changes, uncompromised in particular implying that all the people support their decision in the name of common rule without compromising it by opposition or obstruction. Government by electoral mandate, as discussed in Division and Democracy, is a form of this. So we can see that the problem of the institutions and restoring faith in them leads to the same institution of popular rule that we'd expect to find in the democracy, that we'd expect a democracy to be, and can't find. The absence of democracy is proved from lack of popular faith and, separately, from simple observation. It's not quite that simple. The complication is in signs that the democracy is supposed to be there, that we can see in our institutions, parliament, bureaucracy, press and so on, elements of theoretical provision of democracy. Our problem is then to work out what has happened to the democracy. I'm not sure we've ever had, in theory, a full workable democracy where, for example, the French revolutionaries ever fully understood the implications of capitalism, still across the English Channel, or the Church for Democracy, or, as I suggest in Division and Democracy, that the theoretical role of the media was ever sound. But to say there was a complete theory, but elements of it were just faulty, is too close to contradictory for us to bother with further. More to the point, things have changed so much in 1789 that, of course, the theory of 230 years ago will have developed deficiencies. I haven't even mentioned the development of the fully centralised nation-state. I haven't mentioned J.S. Mill and the decline of morality since the 1860s that he could not have foreseen. The task in 2019 is to add or restore democracy as we know it, should be, to society, and includes understanding what has happened to it, where what has happened deserted the democratic aims of theory. Seeing how things went wrong is a further form of proof that they did go wrong, that theory was either defective or overtaken by time, additional to public loss of faith, the absence of the institution of popular rule and the overt political signs of democratic degeneration. Religious belief. There are a couple of senses in which I should say that democracy's being a religion is far from being just my idea. One sense, which I can't spend much time on here, that's covered in the Code title volume, is that religious belief isn't anybody's idea. I compare my regarding freedom as a god to knowing I don't want my arm chainsawed off. That's not something I thought up. I just knew it, like an article of faith. I imagine some other people may be similarly attached to their arms. From there, whether you consider a choice between your arm and your freedom, or whether other quite religious people would choose their arm or their God, or their life over freedom or their God, there's no problem regarding freedom as a god. Long history of religious democracy. There are many religious underpinnings of democracy. I'm told the French revolutionaries actually had an idea of an alternative religion of nature, which I haven't had time to research, but maybe what those pictures by Rousseau with the caffeinated animals were about. I'll come back to the revolution through Christianity, just suggesting here that if there were revolutionaries who thought religion had no place in democracy, I think the event is suggesting they were wrong. One person who evidently agrees they were wrong is the Australian newspaper's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan, who I quote at the start of The Press and Democracy, saying that with Christianity declining in the West, there'd be every reason to doubt that the societies would survive with no morality beyond the individual. So that brings us immediately to Jesus. What Jesus said about how to live in society goes immediately to our conception above of democracy. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and love thy neighbour. That's a doctrine about how to make society work, but it's very much about making a free society work. Jesus was preaching a doctrine of human free will to people who must have been in important ways free to decide what they believed. The commitment to God was personal. So the millennia-long partnership with democracy is no accident. And of course the totalitarian states have suppressed Christianity one way or another because it's an alternative authority to the state, something only permissible under democracy. With salvation very much an individual thing, Christianity has the individualism of Sheridan's West, but with the morality. Beyond that, Jesus also preached equality, as in equal in the sight of God. We have to note the doctrinal connection here to the revolution, its equality, but in fact, the fraternity of the revolution looks an even stronger connection just because Jesus was so explicit about Christian love, St. Paul's charity. I have to mention Pope Francis. In his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, A Care for Our Common Home, he directly associates the contemporary replacement of democracy by technocracy, with a decline in spirituality in favour of materialism. We know he's going to say more people should believe, but the associated reflection on democracy is just independent analysis. I think that only leaves capitalism, democracy's other partner. The simple proposition here is that the partnership between capitalism and Christianity has been essential to making democracy feasible in anything like a valid form. It's easy to argue both that free enterprise capitalism is anti-democratic, unfraternal, unegalitarian in its competitive nature, and that Christianity is the necessary counterbalance to those aggressively competitive tendencies to enable democracy. From the early days of the Industrial Revolution, denominations like Methodism sought to curb and relieve capitalism's exploitative excesses. From the moment when Adam Smith societally legitimised competition with the invisible hand, Smith, professor of moral philosophy as well as economist, made clear the necessity of a moral code to free enterprise. That capitalism extracted the invisible hand from its moral context, as by nature it would, may well offer us the dual explanation of why the democracies are failing and the necessity to restore morality to them if they are to survive. Free enterprise has helped democracy come to dominate the world, but in partnership with Christianity. Now we face the prospect that free enterprise without Christianity may be bringing the democracies down. Faith and mechanics. Division in democracy describes a process whereby a combination of electoral mandate and elimination of checks and obstruction of the elected government's mandate and of the popular division and self-depowering contradiction which legitimises this obstruction could restore a significant degree of democratic rule. The principle that the people must unite if they are to rule is argued there simply as a matter of logic, while ever their partisan division leverages disrespect and obstruction of their electoral decision in Parliament and the media, the main institutions considered. They never effectively rule, their democracy reduced to indeterminate verbiage. Unity is transforming, but I think to imagine this unity could be achieved by logic in a merely negative sense of eliminating division is naive. Some powerful positive alternative would need to replace what is, after all, one of the chief sources of thought, feeling and belief for all those with a firm party commitment, possibly well over half the voting population. The positive of unity can't have that rather abstract mechanical quality, but needs to offer its own powerful affirmations of satisfaction with what is virtually a political way of life: rule, tranquility, communal fraternity, dignity in citizenship and equality, fairness in material share and reward for enterprise. Trust and unity. Straight away, unity implies trust. How do we know it isn't a trick to move me away from my party and the only true political principles as embodied in my party only, the principles of individual enterprise or of compassionate justice, to actually get me supporting a government of ruthless capital exploitation of the people or nanny-statist incentiveless dependency? These are powerful attachments and aversions to expect people to relinquish. I argue in Division and Democracy that these morally and politically polar outlooks ignore the fact that at any time there are unlikely to be two diametrically opposite answers as to how best to govern Australia for the next 3 years. Logic's fine, but there is an assumption I make too that half the people plus one are hardly likely to elect a government of such reckless ideological excess that the other half of the people are savagely and unfairly oppressed. We can see the extremes of disadvantage and advantage in the very poor and the very rich, though ideological interest is always more in propagandising those states than examining what they actually involve, the symbolic as opposed to real contemporary political debate, drama of Godzilla versus Mothra. But in the locations in Australia I've visited, the capitals, except Perth and Darwin, my present hometown of Tamworth, this bisection of the ordinary people is not evident. I've survived several years in a fibro house in Old Oxley Vale, even though the homes in the newer Oxley Vale developments are brick, believe it or not. The half of the people that don't associate with the other half have not yet been cited, to my knowledge. What we have, I would suggest, is a mix of friendliness and animosity at individual and personal level, the individual animosities being very much, as it were, the plan of keeping the people divided and hostile among themselves in supposed expression of polar ideological division, which is in fact false. The oppressive invention of those fabricating causes in which to lead the people for the leader's own leadershiping ends, fabricating conflict among the ordinary people to sell newspapers, fill television time slots and rule the people thus divided. The fragmentation of society at the personal level, Latham notes in his diaries the individually isolating welfare model. I talk of people relating more to the media than their next door neighbour or even family members, and there is the effect of tightening economic conditions would fill a book. Fraternity and charity. These powerful hostile forces, drawing on the barbarism in human nature, will not be overcome, it seems, by anything less than a more powerful countervailing force, not, as I say, by mere avoidance. That countervailing force we know well as the humane Christian love of charity, of thy neighbour as thyself, because you are, as fellow humans, more alike than different and naturally sympathetic, however things may look on Twitter or in the fragmentary hostilities of our community. No, as the fraternity of the French Revolution, which elevated common democratic citizenship and popular rule above all differences. Far from our wondering why partisan ideological leadershiping to sow discord among the people would require a religious resistance, the power of these forces today and the prominence of their opposites in Christianity and the Revolution would make us wonder why it would require anything less. Are we really wondering why Jesus bothered? Whether perhaps the revolutionaries, expressing a century of Enlightenment thinking, only tack fraternity onto liberty and equality because, with its first letter of F and its stressed T of the second syllable, the acronym for the motto is left. Why the unity of the people would not be defended as sacred in the name of democracy escapes me. If we need conflict, why not the conflict between those who thrive on conflict as the appropriate condition of the people and those who don't? Why not morally oppose the sowing of conflict? Rabid public ideologising, you racist, toxic, white, male, insane, Nazi, cis climate denialist, gratuitous press trashing of Prime Minister, government and elective mandate, and all these groups, Get Up, unions, Human Rights Commission, business groups, the council for this and that, influential individuals, wanting a bit of rule over the people's heads. We love free speech, let's do it. It will need organisation of the people in a spirit of religious conviction. Reason. Again, reason requires assertion both as fundamental to the democratic process and in opposition to contemporary anti-democratic attempts to undermine it. Attempts to undermine reason can be generally said to involve the elevation of emotion over it as a method of persuasion, the emotionally generated leap of faith to a certainty which transcends reason. Hitler describes the individual at mass demonstrations being swept away by the magic influence of mass suggestion. That's Mein Kampf, page 435. It is summed up in the principle of Nietzsche, Hitler's official philosopher, quote, "What must first be proved is worth little," end of quote. This is covered in my unpublished Mentalities, Rational versus Emotional. Richard Wollen's The Seduction of Unreason, the intellectual romance with fascism from Nietzsche to postmodernism, in fact goes back before Nietzsche to the French Revolution in describing the religious character of opposition to the revolution. I'll have to revise Mentalities to accommodate the desirable emotions of religion. The argument that postmodernism was, among other things, a counter-Enlightenment, anti-democratic religion that I present in Back Towards Auschwitz, unpublished, followed fairly naturally, I think, through Nietzsche and other figures considered by Wollen. Contemporary radical feminism, as a politics attempting to displace reason with emotion in a counter-rational elitist manner, probably a continuation of postmodernist thinking, I deal with in videos 1A to E and 2 on YouTube in my series on a television debate, Agenda Free Speech at What Cost? Search code Stan Heuston Agenda. Left tendencies to identity politics and superstitious, compassionate approaches to issues like refugees, I see as part of the same mentality. Perhaps we need to consider whether these developments cater to a religious need which contemporary society doesn't meet. The recognition that reason depends on love in the same way as unity does is a starting place at the heart of religious process. There can be no reasoned debate among the people without trust. "We are finished, we all die the minute that we start to lie" probably abbreviates the process figuratively, but is sound advice in Psycho Killer. Twain's concern at the degeneration of language to soul butter and hogwash from the mouths of mountebanks in Huckleberry Finn sees us watching a senselessly murderous family feud by the end of the book. At all points, community debate of issues depends on sincerity, which can ultimately mean seeing your disputant and their interest as equal in importance to you and yours. Fraternal citizenship. The strict experimental controls and observational discipline of physical science that try to place fact beyond personal sincerity and trust are not available to community debate, and even those seem to be under increasing suspicion today of falsification. We try and debate to make fact objective. Statistics will show low conviction rates for rape allegations in support of a North American rape culture. All insincerity needs to do is omit that the United States is the only Western nation in which rape is a widespread decisive factor in capital sentencing, and the statistics showing huge improvements in dealing with rape. YouTube code Stan Heuston Agenda 1D fabrication. This, of course, in no way reflects negatively on genuine attempts to put fact in community debate on an objective basis, but only to make the point that that is part of the wider proof of sincerity and establishment of trust. Belief in sincerity is inclusive of the objectivity of fact, not the reverse. I think this rather dry approach to charity is a good time to make another general point about code. It's a rational religion, different in that any of its tenets can be rationally overturned. The democratic citizen, to my mind, lives constantly with what many will see as the dilemma that emotion must never corrupt their strictly rational reason, and reason must never corrupt their overriding love of their fellow human and citizen. I think it's clear that the societal state I've tried to describe of a disciplined, communal, rationally founded disciplined communal rationality founded in the sincerity of love is at once the democratic condition and religious in character. An unexpected reciprocity of process, whereby reason is a principal foundation of love, is described in the title Code volume, though again first appearing in The Present Democracy. Of the historical institutional trio, it is capitalism, competitive free enterprise, that clearly threatens imbalance and eventual destruction of the other two, Christianity and democracy. Stripped of its overriding morality as described, it has enough of the law of the jungle about it for that to be fairly seen as dominant in capitalism by many. The detail of the operation of code in society could fill many more talks. This talk and Division and Democracy dealt with mandated policies developed by the parties. That can be only a stage in policy eventually coming from the people. The demands on code operatives of knowledge and change in society, which must be inspired by example, may or may not suggest to listeners a priesthood. Just don't look too demandingly at me for the example. Maybe a little help, please. Please retweet, share and follow. Thanks.